Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating transformation happening right now in the corporate world. We're looking at how the advertising and marketing industry is taking something that feels, well, incredibly subjective, like advertising ethics, and turning it into objective, auditable corporate metrics. To see how this works, we're looking straight at the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB framework. Basically, it's a system that requires agencies to lay all their cards on the table.
To set the stage for our analysis today, let's look at our core thesis. Advertising integrity can be quantified. We break down the exact metrics used to track false, deceptive, or unfair advertising legal losses. Learn how agencies calculate the percentage of campaigns reviewed by self-regulatory bodies and manage the regulatory risks of promoting alcohol and tobacco. That is our blueprint for today.
So here's our audit table of contents for today's explainer. 1. Quantifying advertising integrity. 2. Financial risks of deception. 3. The self-regulatory checklist. And 4. Navigating regulated industries. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Quantifying advertising integrity.
Okay, let's dive into this. In the advertising and marketing industry, there is this constant, delicate balancing act. You're trying to push the boundaries of creative expression, right? But you also have to manage strict regulatory risk. So how do you report on that balance to your stakeholders? Well, we look to the official SASB standard documentation for the sector. Take a close look at that advertising integrity row. Now, these sustainability-related financial disclosures are actually overseen by the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. Their whole goal is to standardize how entities disclose risks that could mess with their cash flows or access to finance. Notice how they break down integrity into 3 very distinct quantitative codes, SVAD 270A.1, Point 2, and Point 3. Each one targets a completely different aspect of accountability.
Moving on to Section 2, Financial Risks of Deception.
Let's see how this actually builds into real-world consequences, because we're looking at the absolute most punitive metric an agency can face: hard financial losses. Metric SVAD 270A.1 requires companies to disclose the total amount of monetary losses they've incurred from legal proceedings associated with false, deceptive, or unfair advertising. Now, you might be wondering, wait, isn't the client the one on the hook for false claims? Well, not always. While the compliance burden definitely heavily involves the client, regulators absolutely can and absolutely do investigate and directly penalize the ad agencies who actually create and place the deceptive content.
So this metric casts a pretty wide net over legal proceedings. As you'll see, it includes civil actions like your judgments or settlements, regulatory proceedings such as penalties or restitution, and yes, even criminal actions. But take a look at the exclusions column on the right. Entities have to exclude legal defense fees from this total. Regulators want to see the pure, unadulterated punitive cost of the deception totally unclouded by expensive lawyer fees. On top of that, the standard demands context. Entities have to briefly describe the nature of these losses, say maybe a lack of substantiation for a product claim, and they must disclose any corrective actions they've taken, whether that's in management, training, or new technology, just to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Section 3. The self-regulatory checklist. But how do we measure fairness before a campaign even launches and ends up in court?
Agencies don't just guess what's acceptable. They use strict self-regulatory assessment procedures. According to the SASB standard, there are 7 key criteria an advertisement might be assessed against. Let's walk through this checklist. First up, we have legality, meaning, it actually complies with the law. Decency, ensuring it doesn't violate local cultural norms. Honesty, this means the ad doesn't abuse the trust of consumers or exploit their lack of knowledge. Then there's truthfulness, making sure the content isn't misleading. Social responsibility dictates the ad respects human dignity and is completely free from discrimination. Fairness means it isn't derogatory to competitors and has 0 plagiarism. And finally, privacy, ensuring consumer data protection rules are strictly followed.
So, the crucial point here is how agencies actually report on this checklist. Metric SVAD 270A.2 is calculated by revenue, not just a simple campaign count. This is a massive distinction in the audit world. Think about it. It means an agency can't just run 100 tiny, low-risk, cheap compliant campaigns and then quietly sneak in one massive, non-compliant, multi-million-dollar campaign and claim a 99% success rate. No way. The metric is weighted by the actual revenue those campaigns generate compared to total advertising and marketing revenue.
And because of this revenue weighting, agencies are required to publicly disclose 2 distinct figures. First, what percentage of their campaigns were even reviewed by a self-regulatory organization in the first place, and second,
Of that reviewed slice, what percentage were actually found to be in full compliance with those 7 criteria we just broke down? It forces a really high level of transparency. Basically, it forces an agency to show their work.
Section 4. Navigating regulated industries. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that even if an agency is perfectly honest and decent, certain product categories inherently carry massive regulatory risk simply by existing. The SASB framework rigidly defines these high-risk sectors under metric SVAD 278.3, and it leaves absolutely zero room for ambiguity. Tobacco products are defined as any product made or derived from tobacco for human consumption. This sweeps up everything from traditional cigarettes to smokeless tobacco and even their accessories. And look at alcohol. We're not just talking spirits or wine here. It's any product capable of being consumed that contains more than a mere 0.5% of ethanol or ethyl alcohol by volume. If an agency works with these products, boom, they trigger this specific reporting requirement.
So here is how that reporting looks in practice. Agencies have to map out their financial dependency on these regulated products. They calculate the exact revenue generated strictly from advertising alcohol, the revenue from advertising tobacco, and then divide that by their total campaign revenue. This gives stakeholders a perfectly clear, unmistakable view of their exposure to heavily scrutinized industries.
But SASB knows it's not just about crunching the numbers, right? Entities are strongly encouraged to discuss the narrative behind the data. How are they actively managing these regulatory impacts? Promoting alcohol and tobacco involves navigating an absolute maze of specific prohibitions, strict media restrictions on where ads can even be placed, and complex warning label requirements. The standard is essentially asking agencies to explain their internal processes for ensuring every single campaign clears these legal hurdles flawlessly.
Which brings us to a critical closing thought. The data doesn't lie, and the standards are literally only getting stricter. As advertising becomes increasingly targeted, personalized, and complex, how will your organization's integrity metrics hold up to the next audit? Transparency is no longer just a nice-to-have. As we've seen through the SASB metrics today, it's a quantifiable, auditable requirement. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deeper look at the data inspires you to explore these standards even further.